if you don't know me, my name's Dave. I'm part of the team here at Community Church. And yes, we're doing our Service of God at Work, talking about the impact God has on our 9 to 5, our daily life. And so what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what I do for a job and how my faith impacts on that. And then we're going to look a little bit, like I said, about the story of the prodigal son and how sort of themes and that sort of link in with what I do. So, you've all seen the nice big exciting picture for that. Okay. So, when I was about 15, I can't really remember the exact time or even the exact service, but I know that God spoke to me very clearly about this verse in the end of John, when Peter is talking to Jesus, and Jesus says to Peter, "Do you love me?" And he says, "Yes, of course you do, I do." And Jesus says to him, "Feed my lambs." And then he says, "Look after my sheep and care for my sheep as well." And I'm not sure theologically where what this is, but for me, God spoke very clearly to me that He wanted me to be working with young people. And the fact that He said to feed the lambs first, that was what I took out of that. And so that's really been my career. I thought I was going to be a teacher, but that didn't happen, so I changed my mind. I did some youth work with Youth of Christ, and then the council, and then I was a postman for a bit, and then I worked in an office for a bit, which was very exciting. And then I went and worked in a young offenders institute, so working with 15 to 18-year-olds in prison. So I thought that'd be a really great way of having a positive influence on young people. Turns out it wasn't that amazing. Basically, I was a glorified security guard, making sure they didn't sort of fight each other. So I think after that year, it wasn't really my thing, and there was nights involved, it was not good. So I went and trained as a probation officer, with the thought that I think I'd work with the youth offending team. And I was a probation officer for about 10 years before I remembered. The whole theory was that I was going to go and work with the youth offending team. So I then moved across and worked with the youth offending team, and that's where I work at the moment. When I tell people that I work for the yachts, those people think of this. They don't think of that, sometimes they think of that. But actually my day-to-day life is more like that. Which is a very boring office in the centre of town. So the youth offending team, well, we're just rebranding to the Youth Justice Service now, because I'm trying to take the word offending out of our name as part of that kind of trying to label young people. So we work with 10 to 18-year-olds, and I actually manage the team that looks after the south area of Bristol, and we work on people that have been in trouble with the law, so they're either having a caution or sort of community sentence, working with the yacht, all the way up to people that have been in prison, and so a really wide variety of things that happen to those young people, right through quite sort of relatively minor antisocial behaviour, all the way up through to sort of very serious offences that you can think of. We work with those young people, and we try and build positive relationships with them, try and help them to think about how they can stay safe and how they can not hurt other people, and how they can sort of achieve their potential. Sometimes how they can make amends for what they've done, and we work with them around their education, their housing, their family, their sort of issues, and drugs, and weapons, and gangs, all sort of variety. And actually, I don't actually get to do much of that anymore, unfortunately. But the team that I manage does all that really interesting work, and I do lots of counselling reports. Really interesting stuff. Just really quickly, these are the sort of young people that we work with. About 80 to 85% of them are male. Boys, 75% are white at the moment. Those are black, which is quite interesting because that's disproportionate to the sort of population of Bristol as a whole. There's a high proportion of black and mixed heritage young people on our caseload compared to sort of Bristol as a whole. Generally 10 to 18-year-olds, most of them kind of 15, 16, 17 are kind of key ages. Occasionally we get some 10-year-olds through. They're a bit tricky to work. Oh dear. Shall I just stand really still? Only about 30% of them are in full-time education, which obviously is not good. Much higher rates of ADHD and speech and language communication needs than the current general population. Often undiagnosed before they come to us. We have a speech and language therapist who works with us, and she says a lot of young people, well, the majority of young people that she works with, or the way we refer to her, just kind of self-selecting, have speech and language needs that haven't been identified previously in the schools, often because they've not been in school for a long time. And a large proportion of them have high rates of what they call adverse childhood experiences, which are things that happen to young people and their families as they're growing up and have a huge impact on them. Who are they? They're brilliant, they're creative, they're capable of change, they're ambitious, they're funny, and they're loved by God. And they're also annoying and irritating. Frustrating, late, and occasionally rude, and sometimes aggressive. But they're loved by God. Interesting, I was thinking about this talk this evening, and some of the language we use at work is quite similar to sort of church language. So we talk a lot about their journey, about where they're going to, their kind of identity change. We talk a little bit about forgiveness when it comes to sort of restorative practices. We have restorative justice conferences with victims. We talk about them having fresh starts. We talk about restoration, about bringing them back to where they could be. We talk a lot about their potential. And this, I love this, we talk about unconditional positive regard, which is a kind of it's a sort of, well, it is what it says. Particularly when working with young people who have significant trauma histories, having that really clear unconditional positive regard. So loving them, we don't say love, that's authority. Loving them, whatever, having that unconditional love. So yeah, there's quite a lot of that which is quite similar to when we think about sort of church and faith journeys. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about that when we look at the story of the prodigal son and share a few thoughts about identity. We'll see how long this takes me. Right, this is a picture that hangs on the wall of the chapel at Ashfield, which is the Young Men's Institute that I worked at. And it's a picture of the prodigal son and the father, and there's a sort of a summary in the back, and that's on the back wall of the church at Ashfield. And I don't know how many of you can play it, but I think it's quite a powerful starting point for their experience at church when they were in the prison. So we're going to look at that story very quickly. So Jesus continued, he'd been talking, carried on talking. There was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called a son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The father said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called all the servants and asked them what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied. 'Your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and I've never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never eat even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends.' It's quite amazing. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes to him, you kill the fattened calf for him. 'My son,' the father said, 'you're always with me and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And that's in Luke 15, verses 11, not to 323. Maybe it felt like a long story, but it's probably 23. We work with young people who've made mistakes. Some of those mistakes are pretty minor. Some have pretty severe impact on them and for other people. Some are one-off lapses of judgment. Some are part of learned behaviours or development habits. Some are subconscious reactions to their circumstances. Some are deliberate choices. And we work with young people to understand their behaviour and ideally not do it again. To be able to respond differently next time. To consider other people to make good choices. For the young people we work with, there are still consequences. Now, in this story, the father's welcomed back by his father with open arms. But there are going to be some ongoing consequences for that son. He's lost his inheritance. He doesn't have that status anymore as a son. The older brother is pretty fixated on that. But the father in the story is just happy for the son's home. From the outside, from the bypasses, probably for the servants, it looks like the son has lost out. He's got no money or claim, no status. But his father still calls him son. So his identity was not found in money or job or status, or in the eyes of others, but because of his relationship to his father. And our identity is not found in money or jobs or status, or in the eyes of others, but in our relationship with God. His identity was never lost. He was always a son, even when he didn't want to be. We are who we are. We are children of God. You can't change your identity with God. You can't change how he sees you. He will always run to you. You can't do anything about that to change it. You can't hand it in, you can't trade it up, you can't let it lapse, you can't forget to renew it. You can't swap it for something else. You are a child of God, whether you like it or not. Romans talks about this as, for I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. That left spirit. Not redundancy, not promotion, not worry or confidence, not power or failures, not mistakes, not successes, not feeding pigs, not wearing the best robes. The son in that story was a son before he left. He was a son while he was away, and he was a son when he returned. But there was something that changed for him. So as I said earlier, we work with young people, we try and help them to change, to make better choices, to make fresh starts. We have something called the trauma recovery model, which is a way that we work with young people who've got really significant trauma history. And that talks about, and it's not really relevant, but quite it talks about growing up as being about little people learning how to be people from big people. Which isn't really relevant at all, but I quite like it as a sort of joke. But we look at these young people and we think about their history and the trauma, what's happened to them, and how things that have happened to them as they've grown up impact on the decisions that they make now. And I think that's really relevant to us as well. Because actually how the things that have happened to us, our upbringing, Nancy talked last week about her experience and her history, her childhood rather, being a pioneer of her family, impacts now on her faith and how she sees her faith and her role. And actually, what's happened to us in our past, our family, within our church, with our friends, impacts our relationship with God. And I think that we also need to maybe think about how, as a church, that we welcome people who had a different history with church than we have done. How can we be open and welcome as a church family to people who've got a different experience in life? And I think maybe that unconditional positive regard is probably a good place to start. Along with some other principles like consistency and transparency. So the good news about that, though, is that while it's important to understand our history, we're not bound by it. So when we talk about young people, we understand where they've come from. But they're not fixed by that now. They've still got a chance to change. And that's what we do with our young people at work, and I think the same with us. We may feel that we have dirt of the world on us from feeding the pigs, but the Father still runs to us, And sometimes I wonder about what happened afterwards with that son. Presumably he started working for the father like the plan was. Did he feel guilty about that? What's the relationship with the brother like? I often want the next bit of the story now. I want to find out what happens next. I want the sequel. But the son in that story was changed, and that change was about his understanding, about his identity as a son. Actually, there's a ton of stories in the Bible about people changing when they meet Jesus, and we've talked about them a little bit here at the evening service in the past. There's lots of stories about healings where Jesus met with people and they were changed as a result. There's Paul, he also wrote a lot of letters, met with Jesus and changed. Zacchaeus, the stories in the Bible in Luke about a man who was cheating, who met with Jesus and changed. And there would have been consequences for those people as well. And I do wonder also, I imagine there were some people that Jesus met and didn't change. And again, it would be nice to hear their stories sometimes. And we know about the rich young ruler, it's called, in Mark, who met with Jesus and was challenged, but wasn't able to make that change that Jesus sort of called him. But I kind of hope that maybe one day he did. How do we change? So I think a few things. I think we meet with Jesus. And I think we accept who Jesus is, and we accept who we are. So, just to sort of summarise, the son in the story had an encounter with the father which changed his life and brought him back to who he was. The people that met Jesus in the Bible had their lives changed, and they found our identity as followers. I think when we encounter Jesus, our lives are changed, and we can discover our identity as children of God. God already knows who we are. Sometimes we're a bit slow to catch on. But we are who we are, children of God. So if you feel this evening that you're still sat in the pigs, or that you're far from home, my encouragement to you is this, that you are a child of God, and that your loving Father has his arms open wide. I'm going to pray, and we're going to have a chance hopefully to have a chat about some of those things. Father God, thank you. Thank you that you love us. Thank you that we are your children. That our identity is secure. It's not reliant on our understanding or our actions, but it's reliant on you as our Father. And I pray, Father, that as we think about that, and about what that impact that has on how we live our lives and how we treat other people. You just remind us of those things and make it really clear to us.